Greenleaf and the Black Blade, a serialized adventure podcast by Andrew Israelsen. It was late in the afternoon by the time Nima Greenleaf and Johannes Bruckner, newly enlisted scouts of Savar, set off, replete with provisions and supplies from General Alexander's quartermaster. Both were in high spirits as they turned their backs to Amenia. The fresh spring air outside was invigorating, a welcome change from their stifled prison cells. They strode through the north gates as if they owned them. A group of soldiers briefly hailed them, but hurried them along after seeing the emblems given them by Toril. Cool air, blown across the water of the bay of flaking fire, greeted their faces beyond the city gates. It blew their hair and tugged at their cloaks as they walked a safe quarter-mile from the main road. They kept the road in view at all times, but avoided it for the tales of banditry rife upon the traveled ways of late. The raven given her by Alexander leapt from Nima's shoulder as she got clear of the city, and with powerful strokes of its wings ascended into the sky. It soared far ahead before circling back, then ranged out into wider scouting rings. The landscape around them was beautiful. The rolling hills were dotted with oak and ash, sycamore and cherry trees. A group of cotton-tailed deer burst out of a grove of birch, racing past the traveling companions, who seemed content to travel in silence for a time. They kept a fairly brisk pace, soon leaving the city a distant speck on the southern horizon as they headed north, following the instructions sketched out on the map for them by the quartermaster. As the afternoon waned into evening, the two exchanged some small discussion, touching upon such things as the weather and the way before them, and whether they should stop and eat now or later, and some such stuff as that. More serious conversation was deferred, as if by unspoken agreement. Around sunset, and perhaps 8 or 9 miles into their journey, Nima's raven came diving out of the sky, letting out a series of loud caws before alighting on her shoulder. Its talons dug uncomfortably into Nima's skin, and it appeared in a state of high agitation. A stone's throw ahead and to the right, Bruckner detected the sound of footfalls, and perhaps a faint howl to the immediate north. He could see nothing, however. Within a few moments, the sound of heavy footfalls was audible to both. The creatures whose feet these were came over the crest of a small hill, emerging from out of a stand of poplars. 3 wolf-like creatures, standing upright on their hind legs, bearing jagged weapons silhouetted against the moon.
Run, little rabbits, run.
The foremost beast howled with an inhuman savagery, and the 3 monsters charged down the hill towards the travelers. The gnolls, for that is what these beasts were called, hideous, hyena-headed humanoids wielding bows and battle axes, charged down the hill as Bruckner's sword leapt ringing from its sheath and Nima readied her crossbow. The two stood side by side. The gnolls came on with great clatter and ferocity. Nima dropped to one knee, firing her bolt at the foremost foe. It whirred over his head and was lost in the darkness beyond. Nima cursed and set to cranking the crossbow's windlass. Bruckner interposed his sword and shield between her and the oncoming beastmen. The gnolls approached in a triangular pattern, one flanking on the right, the other ranging left, and the larger chieftain bringing up the middle. A pair of withered human heads hung from his belt by a knotted rope of hair, their features shrunken and fixed in frozen screams. Rust-colored blood clotted the notches of the gnolls' axe heads. They panted and snarled and screamed with their own madness. The chieftain drew his bow out and notched an arrow. Bruckner breathed slowly, taking in the field and the movement of their foes. All was storm and sudden violence, a trial by lightning. Bruckner whispered a prayer, swifter than a thunderbolt, to blessed Talus. His lips traced the words of the litany of the swordsman, the prayer of Elium's faithful. Nima sprang up from behind the cover of Bruckner's shield, releasing a bolt. It struck the rightmost gnoll in the shoulder, bringing him momentarily to a knee. The creature howled, and the others roared in shared fury at his injury. The leader drew his bow back and released an arrow aimed at Bruckner's head, but it went high. The leftmost gnoll sprang at the swordsman, swinging mightily with his battle axe. Bruckner lifted his shield, deftly deflecting the blow. As the gnoll's axe slid off the steel plate, Bruckner struck with his own blade. With a roar, he swung the sword his father had forged out in a mighty arcing cut. The obsidian-dark weapon gleamed in the moonlight, catching the gnoll in the collarbone. The sinews of its neck split, and the bone gave way before the adamantine's razored edge. Blood sprayed from the wound, and the gnoll foamed and gnashed, and the wind ate up his roaring and weeping. Then the beast-man died, falling from Bruckner's sword to the cold earth. From behind Bruckner, Nima fired off another bolt at the gnoll she had struck, but it ricocheted off a makeshift shield he carried. Now he was fast approaching. Leaping to close the distance between them, the monster lashed out at Nima with his axe, striking her leg and cutting deep. She gasped, dropping her crossbow into the mud. The gnoll chief shot another arrow at Bruckner as lightning struck in the distance off toward the bay. Bruckner batted the missile away with his shield as the rain was loosed from the heavens. Nima struggled to stay standing as her blood flowed into the ground, mixing with the rainwater. Seeing his companion's danger in the brief noon cast by a jagged knife of lightning, Bruckner pivoted and raced towards her. He stepped deftly between Nima and the beast as it raised its axe, ready to finish the weakened elf maid. Pale fire veined the velvet sky as Bruckner stabbed his sword up through the throat of the gnoll. The axe slipped from the monster's fingers, thudding dully into the mud alongside its master. Breathing a swift word of thanks, Nima fetched up her crossbow and wildly worked the mechanism behind the cover of Bruckner's shield.
Now!
She cried out, and Bruckner sprang aside, Nima loosing her bolt to land with a thud in the stomach of the remaining foe. He grunted roughly and raised his own bow in retaliation, sending an arrow at Nima, which she ducked under. Distracted by the elf as the beast was, he was unprepared for Bruckner to close the gap between them with a sudden sprint. The gnoll's hideous features were captured, snarling as a twisting lance of lightning spanned the sky, illuminating the drenched landscape. Bruckner swung his sword like a scythe, laying open the gnoll's moldy leather armor. Blood flowed from the rent cuirass. The gnoll swung his axe in reply, catching Bruckner in a glancing blow on the ribs. Nima fired another shot, but the bolt went wide. Wincing in pain, Bruckner roared and slashed out at the wound he had already opened along the gnoll's chest. The monster leapt forward at the same moment, his axe raised overhead. Bruckner's swing caught the beast under the armpit and split him like an overripe fruit. The hyena-faced warrior fell dead without a sound, his split body laying against the blood-soaked earth like an anathema, his still pulsing organs spilling out of the split bag that had been his living flesh only moments before. The rain was picking up, the weather growing wilder. Lightning strikes displayed the carnage in brief, flickering visions. The three gnolls lay dead on the ground. The world around them was muck and mud, a morass of water and blood.